The European Union and Kenya have signed a trade deal as Brussels seeks to deepen economic ties with East Africa's economic powerhouse. The signing of the Kenya-EU Partnership Agreement is a result of years of negotiations. President William Ruto of Kenya made this known while presiding over the ceremony in Nairobi, saying that the pact will grant Kenyan products immediate duty-free entry into the European Union market from the day it comes into effect. President Ruto said it assures of an expanded, lucrative and sustainable market, enhancing trade and investment opportunities. He also noted that increased trade with the EU, with a population of about 500 million people, will create jobs, expand earnings and stimulate sustainable economic growth. So this morning, before we bring our guest on the show, let's listen to the Kenyan president and the EU Trade Commissioner talk about this.
On behalf of the European Union, it's my great honor to be here for what is a truly historic occasion. The conclusions of the negotiations of Economic Partnership Agreement marks a new and exciting departure in our relations. This agreement contains strong ambitions on trade and sustainable development. Indeed, this is the most ambitious trade deal the EU has concluded with any African country when it comes to climate protection, labor rights and gender equality. This will benefit both sides, our people, our environment and our climate. And let's be clear, it will also benefit our economies.
The agreement will grant Kenyan products immediate, duty-free, quota-free entry into the EU from the day it comes into effect. And in recognition of our varied stage of progress along the development journey, products from the EU will progressively receive duty reductions over a period of 25 years. Although the EU is already Kenya's largest export destination, accounting for 21% of Kenya's total exports, the agreement we have negotiated provides significant opportunities to enhance this performance. It assures a stable market for industrialists, for our farmers, and also industrialists in the European Union.
All right, and that is the president of Kenya talking there. And earlier on, we had the EU Trade Commissioner also talking about this trade deal that has been signed between the both entities. So joining me this morning from Nairobi, Kenya is Lekan Satchu. He's an Africa Geo-economist and macro analyst, and of course the CEO of Reach Management. It's nice to have you join us, Lekan Satchu, on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So listening to the EU Trade Commissioner and President William Ruto, you sense a bit of excitement on their part because for EU, it means that Kenyan products will be able to meet its needs, of course, due to the disruptions and the issues it had, judging by what has transpired of late between Russia and Ukraine. But now there's a bit of reprieve coming to EU. And for Kenya, this means that its market will be opened and there will be more opportunities for its commodities to be accessed and bought. That would mean that there will be increase in terms of GDP and more revenue for the country. And according to data from the United Nations Comtrade database, we see that last year the trade deal was about 1.17 billion Kenyan shillings in terms of value estimation. That's about $1.32 billion. That's according to facts. So I'd like to understand how important this is for EU and, of course, for Kenya and its goods.
So obviously for Kenya, the EU is our biggest export destination, our second largest trading partner, a significant investor within the country, European companies like Lafarge, Total, amongst many others. So it's a very important relationship. President Ruto has also been pivoting west and has visited Europe, I think, a several number of times as a signal of this pivot. So, look, I think it was an important development for both sides. I think from Kenya's side, the duty-free access to the European markets is important. 70% of our flowers go to the EU. We are big exporters of fresh vegetables. That also will be attractive for the EU in the context of very high food inflation. And I think from the European side, Kenya has been supportive of the European challenge on its eastern border in the Ukraine. This has been against the African trend and therefore I think has significant geopolitical value to the Europeans. But I think from the Kenyan perspective, look, I think Kenya wants to see more investment in manufacturing, wants to see more longer-term investment coming out of Europe. This is something Chancellor Scholz, for example, of Germany visited and spoke about the potential for green hydrogen from some of our geothermal assets in Naivasha. So I think overall a win-win, and you notice that in the language that was used by both sides.
All right, now that you have mentioned commodities like flour, now we also know that Kenya is also a top producer of coffee. Now, I'd like to find out from you, aside these two, which other commodities do you think could make the bulk of revenue come to Kenya in terms of trade volume and value? And what countries do you think could be stiff competition for Kenya? Because the conversation has always been around how Kenya, or if Kenya has the capacity to scale up production to meet EU needs.
That's a very interesting question. You know, about scaling up production. Clearly, this current administration's one of the main planks of its economic program is precisely that, scaling up agricultural production. This has been a common theme in the administration that, you know, it's all about increasing production, and that will have positive spillover effects, not only for inflation, but also for the foreign exchange situation. So I'm not convinced it's as elastic as the government is suggesting. I think it will take some effort to get production up to a sufficient level. So you've got a potential on the agricultural side. I think you know, this is where Europe can really assist. And I think you've also got tourism, which you didn't touch on. That's Europeans are a big source of Kenya inbound tourism. Coffee, our coffee production has slipped considerably, you know, from what it was 10, 20 years ago. So, you know, we really have to look at coffee production. I'm not so convinced that that is an easy win. But overall, look, this is an important relationship, and I think the current treaty gives Kenya the opportunity to leverage that relationship more meaningfully going forward.
All right, in 2014, EAC members, which included Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Uganda, and others, actually negotiated an economic partnership agreement with the EU. That was in 2014. But it couldn't come into being because other countries refused to append their signature to that particular deal. So I'd like to understand why there was a bit of restraint on the part of these other Horn of African countries. Of course, that would have been a major EAC trade deal agreement as at that time. And between then and now, it would have brought about a robust, a more burgeoning economy for that region as we have now. So why is it that they were a bit reserved to signing that deal in 2014?
So a lot of these East African countries at the time were quite unhappy that Kenya was negotiating with the EU. They said that Kenya should have negotiated with the EU under the umbrella of the East African community. And that was a criticism we heard a lot. But surprisingly, I've not heard it so much this time around. The issue for the other countries in the East African community is that they felt uncomfortable around giving the Europeans free access to our markets. They feared dumping by the EU. Milk is one classic example where the EU has been known to have overproduction of milk within the European Union, and has been known to sell milk very cheaply abroad. That's just an example. But listening to your piece, you would have noted that the European Union official and the President of Kenya spoke about access being given to the European Union over a 25-year period. So I suspect that was designed to allay fears of other East African community countries about signing this agreement. And I think the strategy here by the EU is to broaden out this agreement into an East African community-wide agreement at a later date. That clearly was something that I could hear and was in the signal in both presentations by the Kenyan president and the EU trade official.
All right, so finally, before I let you go, Lekan, now in a 2021 study, there was a particular report highlighted the fact that Kenya has issues with meeting up with standard and requirements for these EU products. Of course, for EU, that's EU standards now, that Kenya has issues meeting up with those standards for the products that will be imported by the EU. So do you think that Kenya will be able to scale up in terms of also improving the quality demands and requirements for exportable items to the EU?
So I think obviously EU standards are quite high. These EU standards relate to, for example, pesticides, relate to employee rights. I heard the official touch on gender rights. So there's a whole smorgasbord of issues that the EU wants Kenya to meet. And I don't think Kenya is going to be able to meet them all. However, and therefore, I think you're going to have a two-tier system here in Kenya where there will be companies who've had experience with exporting into the EU market and who will continue to do that. You'll have other companies who'll make the decision that it makes sense to meet the threshold of EU requirements across that vast swathe.
Okay.
I suspect it's not going to be uniform and across the board.
All right, thank you so much, Lekan. We see that this is a first for Kenya, and we hope that it will be able to bring about quality investments and growth in the critical sectors of the economy, and of course, provide jobs for the teeming population in Kenya. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Kenya is a major player in the East African region and has been making efforts to boost trade and promote economic growth. Now, the new agreement with the EU is a major boost for the country's export industry and is expected to lead to increased investments, not only for the country, but for on of Africa nations. And we hope that will be possible for the country. And that is the end of Business Edge for today. You can follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store and visit our website, www.newscentral.africa. Thank you so much for being part of our conversation. Tomorrow is another day. My name is Lekan Onabanjo. Enjoy the rest of your day.